Hey guys, it's Troy with Green and Healthy Living, back with another episode. Today we're going to talk about vermiculture and the use of worms in your house to reduce the amount of food waste that you put out in the trash. We'll talk to you soon. Part of Green and Healthy Living, the green part that we don't talk about a whole lot. We get into the health part of eating smart and breathing and exercising, but we also encourage being green. And one of the things that we like to do is to encourage renewable energy, encourage more fuel efficient or electric vehicles, putting solar on your house, but also utilizing tools to be able to reduce the amount of waste that your personal household is putting out on the curb every week. So this week we're talking about vermiculture, and we are talking about getting yourself set up with a worm farm. Instead of taking your scrap food, your fruits and your veggies, and putting them out in the garbage, you can actually utilize those scraps, put them into a worm bin, and the worms, along with all the other little microorganisms inside of your worm bin, will break that down and turn it into very, very good fertilizer for your household plants and for your garden. So today I'm going to go over my worm bin. As a matter of fact, I've got too much food that we are producing, too much scrap food, so I'm setting up a second worm bin and just transfer over some of the worms from the first bin to the second bin so they can repopulate that and get rid of twice as much of my scraps. So here we go. Okay, beside my garbage can in the kitchen, I have something strange. This is my worm bin. And I can recycle or use things like paper towel rolls with dog hair on them and packaging scraps, just brown paper bags, and then all of my kitchen waste. There you see some Brussels sprout leaves and some bananas and some cabbage and coffee grounds. And then I also took some toilet paper rolls and newspaper, a little bit of newspaper, and cut that up and fed it to, gonna feed it to the worms as well. But when I get into my worm bin, you can also put newspaper in there. All this newspaper, worms love newspaper. It's okay, you just don't want to use the slick, glossy newspaper like the ads. They don't like that. The ink is not digestible and good for them, but this kind of black ink and the real flat ink is organic, and it's okay for them to eat that. So here's my worm bin. We'll go ahead and break into this. You'll notice that I have a layer of newspaper on top that's just a little bit moist. You got to make sure you keep these worms moist. We'll go ahead and take this newspaper off, and if we're quick enough, you'll see a bunch of little suckers eating some garbage. There we go. Oh, and little babies is eating good. They don't like the light, so they'll be popping back in. We're making sure that this is nice and moist. Look at them. Tons of them in there. Just chowing down on the waste of my kitchen and turning it into vermicompost, which is super nutrient-rich material for my garden. There we go. We'll cover them back up. So I've got all this, well, hey there, little guy. Oh, aren't you cute? I've got all this extra waste that I want to put in there, but you can see that they haven't totally eaten what I put in there last week. So I'm going to set up a second worm bin. You can see one of my old worm bins there for these guys to reproduce, repopulate, and give me more dark food for my plants. Hold on. Okay, so we are now looking at some of the stuff that we are going to put into the worm bin, and I'll show you the worm bin in a minute here. But you start off with a mixture of greens and browns, dead stuff, live stuff, and then you want to be able to put a little bit of grit in there so the gizzards and the worms can actually chew on the have something to grind up the food. So what we see here is when I initially ordered my stuff from Uncle Jim's Worm Farm, he sent mineral rock dust and also pumice. So I'll just throw a little bit in there in my initial bedding that I'm going to put in here. Then I got a whole pan of the stuff that we talked about before, which is just food and some newspaper and some cardboard from the center of a toilet paper roll. And I got a little bit of extra newspaper here that I've torn up. And then I've got, I don't know if you saw the video prior to this, but cocoa core. And you can order that right with your worms when you order them. So I got some cocoa core in there. And I went out and I also got a handful of soil off of one of my planters. So some regular dirt, and it's got some weeds in there. And then I also have a few more browns. So I picked up some leaves that we normally have in our compost pile, and I'll just shred those up and add that to the bedding for the worms. So the worms like their soil nice and moist, not terribly moist. I shouldn't be able to go like this and see moisture dripping out, maybe a drip or two, but not much more than that. So you don't want it too wet, but you have to have a little bit wet because the worms breathe through their skin, and their skin needs to be moist to be able to do that. Eventually, what's going to come out is worm castings. 100% organic, as long as you're putting organic stuff in your worm bins. It's 100% organic, and this stuff is just awesome, phenomenal, natural organic fertilizer for your plants. I just ground up or tore up the leaves a little bit, just so there aren't these big, huge, massive leaves throughout the whole thing. I don't think the worms really care about it, but I'll go ahead and add a little bit more newspaper, and then we'll add in a little bit of this rock dust. So I'm going to sprinkle just a little bit of rock dust in here. Not a whole lot, just enough to give the grit to the little guys, and then a little bit of pumice. Okay, I got that all mixed up, and I'm going to add just a little bit of water because I want this to be a little bit moist. But not too moist. Okay, I add a little bit of water here. You can see my newspaper is a little bit limp, a little bit moist. And if I pick this up and squeeze it, I might get a drip or two out of it. That might be a little bit too moist, but then again, I've got cocoa core all throughout this, so I'll mix it up. Make sure it isn't too wet for those worms. If I have to, I can add a little bit more cocoa core or some dry stuff like the newspaper I could add to it to make sure it's not too wet. Okay, I'll put my worm bedding in. Cool. Now I got my soil made up to transfer some of the worms from the existing worm bed into the new worm bed. And I'm going to go ahead and utilize a cute little rake that originally came with my farm. And I'll get me some worms. See if we can get some out of here real quick. There's a good little helping heap of them. Just a good start. There we go. You don't want to play with the worms too much. You just want to let them do their thing and get comfortable. Now all I have to do is go ahead and add my kitchen scraps to this. And we'll let these little guys get underway. Okay, and that's always good to kind of cover this up just a little bit. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and put a layer of wet newspaper, not dripping wet, but definitely moist newspaper right over the top of it. Okay, and then I just took a couple sections of newspaper and rinsed them down in the sink there and laid them over the top. So I've got soil, I've got browns, I've got greens, I've got worms, I've got wet on top, and I'll go ahead and get my top and put that on. And this worm bin is up and operational. Okay, so now we got 2 worm factories going, and they are off to the races. All I have to do now is collect my food scraps and just add it to the worms along with some browns. So, you know, cut up hootie hoots or paper bags or whatever the case may be, newspaper. So part greens, part browns, add it to them, just keep adding. Eventually what's going to happen is I'm going to add some additional layers. So when you start filling up these different layers and you get to about 1 inch from the top, you put another layer on, you add some fresh food and some browns, and the worms will just keep going and going, and they will make you all sorts of worm castings. Once upon a time, when I first ordered my worm hotels from Uncle Jim's Worm Farm, you could order books along with it. You got the worm book and then Worms Eat My Garbage. I got to tell you, I'm partial to this one by Mary Applehoff, primarily because this one also includes recipes that you can eat the worms. Never mind. Anyway, the other reason I like this particular book is that I believe in supporting local, and this particular author is from Kalamazoo, Michigan. And I'm a Michigan boy, so I like supporting local. So I strongly recommend, if you have the opportunity, to pick up this book called Worms Eat My Garbage, and look into the science behind this. It's very insightful. It's just kind of neat to be able to understand what's going on with the worms and how that helps your garden and your plants with the stuff that they're doing, basically the worm castings. The other thing I'll tell you is that this is a neat project to work with you and your kids. Being able to show the kids the circle of life and how, you know, the smallest of organisms, all the way up to worms, are breaking down food and breaking down bits and pieces and parts and utilizing that to be fertilizer to make more food. It's just a great project, a good family project. So anyway, take a look at Uncle Jim's Worm Farm. I'm sure this book would also be available on Amazon. Maybe we'll put a link up to it if you want to buy it through us on the Amazon. But definitely, I don't want to take anything away from Uncle Jim. So if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't be doing this. So get that book. Get smart. Make sure you check out Uncle Jim's Worm Farm online. He's on YouTube, as well as I'm sure he's got a website that I know he has a website that you can order. But I'm not getting paid for this, but everything I know because of Uncle Jim, and he's the authority on this. So get yourself a worm farm. He'll also ship you out thousands of worms, however many you want, and go from there. But check out Uncle Jim's Worm Farm and start vermacomposting so you could grow your own fruits and vegetables in your garden using all natural vermicompost and additives. Okay, that's it. I'm going to quit stumbling over myself and let you guys get back to your day. Thanks for stopping by Green and Healthy Living.